Thank you, Aaron. Haste, haste to bring him laud. Hurry, hurry to bring him praise. We are here still in the Christmas season, bringing praise to the Christ child. We're coming to the end of the season. We'll be taking the decorations down soon, but happy 8th day of Christmas or 9th day of Christmas. I never quite tell whether to start on the 25th as the first day of Christmas or the 26th of December for the first day of Christmas. Look it up yourselves. You'll find conflicting information. You want to get to the 6th of January after the 12 days of Christmas, but at the same time, by starting on the 25th, you get to the 12th night, the night before Epiphany, which of course is made famous by Shakespeare, 12th night on January 5th. So I'm not exactly sure whether you're supposed to get a bunch of ladies dancing or maids milking today. Not important. What is important is that it's 2022. And so I want to say Happy New Year to everyone. Next week, January 9th, we've been mentioning this for several weeks now, Kevin Austin. I fully anticipate that the rains are coming, the snow is going to melt, and we'll be perfectly fine meeting here next Sunday. So right here in the sanctuary, we're going to commemorate our own Freedom Sunday. Kevin Austin used to be associate pastor of this church 20 plus years ago. But now works with the Set Free movement, working to abolish modern day slavery. And he will be here talking about his work with human trafficking and issues of the modern day abolition movement. I also, a little aside here, but I'll come back to why I bring it up right here. Sadly, since we're not meeting in person this week, we're not able to say aloha to the Dixons, who are heading off for 12 weeks to Hawaii. I know, don't be bitter. We really want to send them, though, with our blessing, and just trust that you'll have a wonderful time at your place there. But I mention it because they're going to be gone. Ken will not be teaching his class, and we're working on some logistics about that for the next couple of months. But Kevin has agreed to stick around after the service next week and do an extended Q&A time during that 11 o'clock hour. Similarly, Marvin and Lisa Klein are coming the following week on January 16th, and they too have agreed to stick around. And so they'll be making presentations in the service and then sticking around. We invite you all to be here for that, to be here for the service, but for everyone to feel welcome to stick around afterwards. For now, this morning, as you're watching, or whatever time of day you're watching this video, it is still Christmas. And like I mentioned, we'll be taking the decorations down this week. But we are in the middle of the 12 days of Christmas. The 12 days that count down and look toward commemorating the arrival of the Magi to worship the baby Jesus, bearing gifts. And I want to kind of focus on that this morning. Kiri's going to sing "O Holy Night" again. I asked her to bring us back to that Christmas carol, and in the middle of that carol, as is several carols, we get the reference to the star leading these wise men, whatever a magi was, who magi were. They follow the star. And so too do we want to be led to the Christ child, that we might worship this one that came on that holy night so long ago.
Holy night, the stars are brightly shining. It is the night of our dear Savior's birth. Long lay the world in sin and error pining, till He appeared and the soul felt its worth. A thrill of hope, the weary world rejoices, for yonder breaks the new and glorious morn. Fall on your knees, oh, hear the angel voice. Truly he taught us to love one another. His law is love, and his gospel is peace. Chains shall he break, for the slave is our brother, and in his name all oppression shall cease. Sweet hymns of joy in grateful chorus raise we, let all within us praise his holy name. Christ is the Lord. Oh, praise his name forever. His power and glory evermore proclaim. His power and glory evermore proclaim.
Matthew chapter 2, the first 11 verses. Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. About that time, some magi from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem asking, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east, and we have come to worship him." King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this, as was everyone in Jerusalem. He called a meeting of the leading priests and teachers of religious law and asked, "Where is the Messiah supposed to be born?" "In Bethlehem in Judea," they said, "for this is what the prophet wrote. And you, O Bethlehem in the land of Judah, are not least among the ruling cities of Judah, for a ruler will come from you who will be the shepherd for my people Israel." Herod called for a private meeting with the wise men and learned from them the time when the star first appeared. And then he told them, "Go to Bethlehem, search carefully for the child, and when you find him, come back and tell me so that I can go and worship him too." After this, the wise men went their way, and the star they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and saw the child with his mother, Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. They opened their treasure chests and they gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
As with joy they
just like men of old beheld a guiding star and followed, so too may we evermore be led to thee. So with this message, we complete our scene here and this series of looking at different characters. We began with a character not in the nativity scene, Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist. Remember that way back at the end of November as we began the Advent season. I focused on Zechariah's question, how can I be sure of this? How can I be sure that what you, angel, is telling me will be true, will come true? And I asked us just to reflect on our own question. How can we be sure? How can we be sure of anything that we say we believe in, or we read about in the scriptures and we say, well, how can we be sure? The answer is we can't necessarily be sure. But the call is, will we believe? Will we trust? In the Zechariah story, at the end of that story, indeed, it came true, just as the angel had said. The second week of Advent, we looked at Mother Mary. We even looked at the text to the old Beatles song. Mother Mary, whisper words of wisdom. Those words of wisdom from the Beatles in the 60s, but from the text from the Gospel of Luke, were Mary's words, let it be. Let it be to me. And my focus that week was for us to lean into Mary as an example of humble submission to the will of God. Lord, may it be, let it be in my life as you will. The following week we went to the father of Jesus, Joseph, his earthly father, who, as I kind of highlighted that week, is a bit player. You know, Mary got the wonderful text of the Magnificat, the line that generations will call Mary blessed, but Joseph is just sort of in the background. He plays a significant part in the story, but he's not the actual, right? He is not the one who conceived this conception of the birth of Jesus. He initially, it looks like there's something immoral going on here, and so he tries to remove himself from the story. But the point I tried to make that week is that bit players are very important. And the important role of a bit player is to be who you're called to be. Now, we have to read between the lines a little bit in the story, but our assumption as we lean into the narrative is that Joseph was there for Mary. We know he was. He took Mary to be his wife, and he took her to Bethlehem, and he was there at the birth, and we can only assume then what other fatherly duties he took upon himself. The importance of showing up, being obedient, doing what needs to be done, no matter whether you get the glory or not. And then we got to Bethlehem. Not necessarily a character. That was the Sunday we were here in the sanctuary for our Christmas brunch, and so with that as the setting, it was fun to lean into the idea of hospitality. And I looked at the famous legend of Bethlehem, where they found no room in the inn, and how that's taken a life of its own, where everyone was just kind of slamming their doors shut, not letting this pregnant woman come into their hotels because they had no rooms for them for the night. But we explored a little bit of the language of there, and perhaps we've missed what was really going on there with the word inn. And I won't preach that sermon again, but I'll just simply say here that if you didn't hear that message, I did look at Luke's parallel, where in the parable of the Good Samaritan, when the Samaritan takes the wounded man to the inn to be cared for, he uses a completely different word than the word that Luke uses here in chapter 2, when there is no room in the inn. And many modern translations now say there is no room in the guest room. And I just offered not to make a big deal about it, but I did suggest that perhaps there's a story in here that's different than the one we've traditionally grown up with no room in the inn. But the reality of perhaps in Bethlehem there was a spirit of generosity. There may have been family and friends there. And yes, it doesn't negate that Jesus, Luke tells us, was born laid in a manger. But a manger was more often than not actually in someone's home, not out back in a barn. No mention of a stable. And I simply asked us that day in this series to celebrate the spirit of ancient Middle Eastern hospitality and community. And once again, playing the roles that we have. Last week it was Christmas, and we talked about the shepherds and the fact that the Christmas story, Emmanuel, comes to ordinary people in commonplace locations. Many of you, you're not necessarily a shepherd keeping watch over your flocks by night out in a field, but what does it mean for you to be, what is your role, your identity? Where do you live and work? And I would suggest that the story is not just this isolated story of angels showing up to those shepherds. Certainly, that's the story in that day, in that town. But the Emmanuel, God with us, is the truth that God comes to each of us, wherever we are, whoever we are. Which gets then fun to now get to this final Sunday and lean into the story of the Magi, because now we have a contrast. Not necessarily in royalty, even though we've called them historically, traditionally, three kings. But we do know there's some wealth involved because they bring some lavish gifts that shepherds didn't have to bring. And so what's fun in our nativity scenes is this contrast between classes of people. And that again, that God is not, plays no favorites, and is no selector of classes of people. Matthew tells us that some magi. Now, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time and going very deep with this. I really want to pick up on one thing at the very end of our scripture text this morning. That is something very, not necessarily profound, something you're aware of. But in our text, these magi, they arrive in Jerusalem and they say, "Where is this newborn King of the Jews? We've come to worship him." And in so many of our nativity scenes, we see the kneeling down, the adoration of the Magi, as many Renaissance paintings are entitled. Not three kings, but Magi, wise men. And King Herod is deeply disturbed because there's a threat here of, he is King Herod. What do you mean, where is the new king? There has not been any coronation scheduled. Luke tells us that not only is King Herod disturbed, but everyone in Jerusalem is disturbed. But I don't want to spend too much time on that. There's many sermons to be preached there. And there are sermons to be preached once again about Bethlehem. With the text, Luke picks up on the text from Micah, that these scholars say this king is to be born in Bethlehem. And then Herod says, when you find him, come tell me so I can go and worship him too. And we all can say a collective right. We know full well that Herod does not intend to worship. In fact, we get the horrific story of the slaughtering of the innocents, which another sermons can be preached there. But let's keep going. The wise men, they follow the star. It stops. I keep saying Luke, but it's Matthew. I'm sorry about it. Matthew is telling us this story. It stops. They enter the house. Some scholars have suggested that this might be up to 2 years after the fact. Once again, kind of destroying, ruining Christmas again for us, that perhaps this kind of scene wasn't necessarily an ever actual scene. Why 2 years later? Well, because when Herod puts out the edict to kill all the boys 2 years and younger, why would Herod kill 2-year-olds if it's just a day old? baby that he's after. And so there's some suggestion in here that we don't necessarily know. We've pieced the stories together to be all part of that holy night. But perhaps it's later. What I find kind of fun and interesting as I've tried to kind of play with some of these facts is another suggestion has been, Matthew tells us when they came into the house. And that now traditionally is said, well, wait a minute, we thought he was out in the stable. Well, we've already kind of destroyed that. So because of that, perhaps the Magi did come and enter the house with the newborn baby. We just don't know. And that's not the point I want to make anyway. Here's the sentences, the last two sentences of our text. They bowed down. They worshiped him. This is where I want to end our Christmas season before then we move on into this new year. These Magi open their gifts. They give him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And there has been sermons preached delving into the possible meaning of these gifts, the gold of royalty, and even the foretelling perhaps of embalming spices that we have in myrrh, and frankincense itself too is an incense. Again, that's not what I want to focus on this week. I want to take us to that very familiar Christina Rossetti poem that looks at this scene. I'm talking about the poem In the Bleak Midwinter, which I thought was kind of fun because that in of itself is a fun poem to kind of bash in terms of factual, because it speaks of the hard earth, the frozen earth, the snow that has fallen in the middle of the harsh, cold winter. And none of us suggest that Jesus was born with snow around his manger. We see the palm trees here in our nativity scene. This Bethlehem is not known for extended periods of sub-freezing temperature. England is, and Christina Rossetti is writing there. But I kind of found it fun as I was reflecting on this week, because we have been in the middle of the bleak winter. Frosty wind making moan, earth standing hard as iron, water like a stone right outside the church here. We've got downspouts that have frozen water in them, and icy sidewalks, which is why we're not here in person this week. Snow had fallen. Snow on snow. We had the Saturday snow and Sunday snow. Later on in the week, we got the Thursday snow. Snow on snow on snow. In the bleak midwinter, long ago, maybe not for our nativity scene. But I would like to fast forward to the last verse of this familiar poem, and you probably know where I'm going. What can I give him? What can I? That's the question I would like you to ask. What can you give? Perhaps you don't have gold, frankincense, or myrrh, and perhaps in 2022, those are not appropriate gifts at all anyway. Rossetti says in her poem, if I were a shepherd, I'd give a lamb, for that's what a shepherd had. If I were a wise man, I would do my part. I would give of my gold, my frankincense, my myrrh. Yet, I've always loved the word yet because it contrasts, right? And yet, here's this. This might be true, and yet. Shepherds might give this, wise men might give this, and yet. We're not talking about shepherds. We're not talking about wise men. We're talking about Jeff. We're talking about you. What can you give him? You can give him your heart. I can give my heart. Last week, again, the shepherds, the Christmas story comes to everyone, to common people. This week, the Emmanuel also comes to scholars, to wise sages, even kings too. Maybe we've debunked the fact that they were kings, but Emmanuel comes to kings too. But whether common or famous, rich or poor, we can give. We offer what we have. And we offer who we are. I was thinking back to how we've been celebrating. I've been mentioning the last couple of weeks how we made it to our World Missions giving goal. And it's a cause for celebration, and I thank God for that as we've prayed, but I thank the generosity of people. And some people were able to give $500, even $1,000. Others could only give $25. Some couldn't give anything because they were giving elsewhere or in other ways. And that's how it works. What will you give him? As we come to the end of this Christmas season, not partridges and pear trees, not drummers drumming, calling birds, lords a-leaping. What will you give him? Christina Rossetti says, I can give him my heart. And I would simply also invite you to not let that just be a sentimentality. Don't let it be a Hallmark card. Give him your heart. That's a touching sentiment. But I would suggest that when I say give him your heart, when I say I give my heart, what I want that to mean is I give of myself, who I am, what I have. As you go forth in 2022, what do you have to give? What do you have in your treasure chests to give? But what do you have on your schedule to give? What do you have in your skill set? Your personality? There are needs aplenty out there that you can give toward in the spirit of a gift to this one that we have been celebrating. Kiri is going to sing In the Bleak Midwinter as we close. May God bless you as you put away the Christmas decorations, but as you continue on in the Christmas spirit. May the light of Christmas light your life. May you light the lives around you. May we all bring light into a dark time and a dark world. I would invite you to stay completely to the end of the song, because there may be just a fun little surprise for you at the very end as well. And I hope then to see you next week. The Lord bless you and keep you. Amen.
In the bleak midwinter, frosty wind made moan, bursted hard as iron, water like a stone. Snow had fallen, snow on snow. In the bleak midwinter, long ago. Heaven cannot hold him.